underway. Here they come.
Hats off, strangers!
The Speaker's procession, the Sergeant-at-Arms, Lawrence Ward, who's just taken up the position, following on from the bar doorkeeper, Vaughan Williams, and then Mr. Speaker himself, of course, John Bercow. And then the Speaker's train bearer, who's Jim Davey. We have the Speaker's secretary and the Speaker's chaplain in this procession too. So they will go into the chamber of the House of Commons. The mace will be put in its place on display near the dispatch boxes. Mr. Speaker acknowledging the greetings of people in the members' lobby of the House of Commons and the two great statues there of Churchill and Lloyd George at the main entrance to the Chamber of the Commons. A packed chamber, all of them waiting to be invited to attend in the House of Lords. So Mr. Speaker takes his place in the chair. Prime Minister Nick Clegg, Chancellor, all in place. And here's Blackrod, Lieutenant General David Leakey, who's now in position in Central Lobby. There's a great view, isn't it? All the way down to the throne in the far distance there in the House of Lords, because he's waiting for the signal. Having a relaxed chat there with one of the police officers. A bit of a crowd in the Central Lobby, but there will be a signal given once the Queen is happy and settled. When she arrives in the House of Lords, the Lord Great Chamberlain will nod and the signal will be passed down to Blackrod, who will then be on his way and will be on that famous walk down from the Central Lobby into the Commons, and then the door will be slammed in Blackrod's face, a symbol of the independence and the autonomy of the House of Commons. Then he's allowed in, and he'll invite them to attend in the House of Lords. Have a look inside the Royal Gallery. I'm just waiting for the signal now that the Queen is ready to begin the procession in state, because that will happen very shortly. When Her Majesty emerges from the robing room, there will be a fanfare. The Lord Great Chamberlain, Marquis of Cholmondeley, with his white wand of office, his symbol of authority, is in the Royal Chamber. He's coming into the Royal Chamber now. Join the Earl Marshal. Everyone stands, and the signal will be given to begin the fanfare. So the state opening of Parliament in this Diamond Jubilee year of 2012 is underway. The procession in state through the Royal Gallery. The Queen celebrated her 86th birthday last month, and the Duke of Edinburgh, who will be celebrating his 91st birthday in just a few weeks' time. Lord Chancellor making his way into the Prince's chamber. Duke of Norfolk, Lord Strathclyde, and Lord Stirrup, the cap of maintenance and the sword of state. And the pages of honour, Arthur Chatto, Lord Stanley, and Charles Armstrong Jones and Andrew Leeming. followed by the ladies in waiting. And gold stick in waiting, that's the office held at the moment by the Princess Royal. And we have, for the first time at the state opening, representatives of all the main branches of the armed forces. So we have the Chief of Defence Staff, we have Air Chief Marshal Sir Stuart Peach, First Sea Lord, and the Chief of the General Staff. Queen will signal that everyone should be seated, and then she will give the signal for Blackrod to be sent.
My lords, pray be seated.
The signal is given by the Lord Great Chamberlain and received by Blackrod in the central lobby. So for the first time in his term of office, Lieutenant General David Leakey makes his way towards the chamber of the House of Commons. Very important symbolism attached to this part of the day's ceremony, because this is all about the autonomy of the House of Commons, the fact that they are independent of the sovereign. And the show of that independence is about to happen. Into the chamber, into the lion's den in some senses, because there could be some shouts and noises off, we'll see.
Mr. Speaker, the Queen commands this honourable House to attend Her Majesty immediately in the House of Peers.
Jubilee year, double dip recession, what a start.
Well, no doubt about who was responsible for the comment. Dennis Skinner, the veteran Labour MP, who specialises in quips on state opening day. But his comment today about Diamond Jubilee year and double dip recession did provoke, I think, some irritation there on the benches opposite. Procession is underway. Final adjustments to Mr. Speaker's gown. Walking with Blackrod, parliamentary clerks. And there we have David Cameron and Ed Miliband, the Labour leader. First glimpse of him today. William Hague, Douglas Alexander, George Osborne and Ed Balls, Theresa May and Yvette Cooper. And other senior parliamentary figures, Ian Duncan Smith, just leaving the Commons, Harriet Harman there, the Deputy Labour leader. Always interesting to watch the body language, Nick.
It is slightly awkward for them having to do this on camera. Of course they do have meetings behind the scenes. The Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition have to brief each other, often on matters of security. But it's always quite fun to see whether they can keep a smile. And in recent weeks in Prime Minister's questions, they've not looked a lot like they like each other.
No.
In truth.
Sometimes it's more convincing than at other times. So we've seen lots of members of the Cabinet and the opposition front bench on their way in. A bit of a scrum. And Rachel, you're watching this with me as well. From the Labour point of view, it's a bit of a scramble, isn't it? People want to get in and get a good view, but there's very little room in the Lords for people to see what's going on.
There is, and I've only been there once before for it, because I was only elected in 2010. But yeah, there's not much space in there, so some people wait in members' lobby to get in earlier rather than being in the House of Commons.
Don Foster there for the Lib Dems making his way in, one of Tim's colleagues here, and we're just seeing them coming now into the main, just what we call the bar of the House of Lords. That's just at the entrance there and beyond the great brass doors. And as they come in, we will see the Lord Chancellor approaching the throne and presenting the speech to the Queen. Prime Minister and Ed Miliband just standing behind the Speaker there at the centre with Blackrod. And once they're satisfied, and the Earl Marshal is satisfied that everyone's in place, we'll then be in a position to see the signal being given to the Lord Chancellor. There we are. Lord Chancellor Kenneth Clarke has presented the speech to Her Majesty, and she's acknowledged the receipt of the speech, which she will now prepare to read.
My Lords and members of the House of Commons, my government's legislative programme will focus on economic growth, justice and constitutional reform. My minister's first priority will be to reduce the deficit and restore economic stability. Legislation will be introduced to reduce burdens on business by repealing unnecessary legislation and to limit state inspection of businesses. My government will introduce legislation to reform competition law to promote enterprise and fair markets. My government will introduce legislation to establish a green investment bank. Measures will be brought forward to further strengthen regulation of the financial services sector and implement the recommendations of the Independent Commission on Banking. My government will introduce legislation to establish an independent adjudicator to ensure supermarkets deal fairly and lawfully with suppliers. A bill will be introduced to reduce burdens on charities, enabling them to claim additional payments on small donations. My government will propose reform of the electricity market to deliver secure, clean and affordable electricity and ensure prices are fair. A draft bill will be published to reform the water industry in England and Wales. My government will bring forward measures to modernise the pension system and reform the state pension, creating a fair, simple and sustainable foundation for private saving. Legislation will be introduced to reform public service pensions in line with the recommendations of the Independent Commission on Public Service Pensions. A draft bill will be published setting out measures to close the Audit Commission and establish new arrangements for the audit of local public bodies. My government will strive to improve the lives of children and families. My government will propose measures to improve provision for disabled children and children with special educational needs. New arrangements will be proposed to support children involved in family law cases, reform court processes for children in care, and strengthen the role of the Children's Commissioner. Measures will be proposed to make parental leave more flexible, so both parents may share parenting responsibilities and balance work and family commitments. A draft bill will be published to modernise adult care and support in England. My government will continue to work with the 15 other Commonwealth realms to take forward reform of the rules governing succession to the Crown. Legislation will be brought forward which will introduce individual registration of electors and improve the administration of elections. A bill will be brought forward to reform the composition of the House of Lords. My government will continue to work constructively and cooperatively with the devolved institutions. Members of the House of Commons, estimates for the public services will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, my government is committed to reducing and preventing crime. A bill will be introduced to establish the National Crime Agency to tackle the most serious and organised crime and strengthen border security. The courts and tribunal service will be reformed to increase efficiency, transparency, and judicial diversity. Legislation will be introduced to protect freedom of speech and reform the law of defamation. My government will introduce legislation to strengthen oversight of the security and intelligence agencies. This will also allow courts, through the limited use of closed proceedings, to hear a greater range of evidence in national security cases. My government intends to bring forward measures to maintain the ability of the law enforcement and intelligence agencies to access vital communications data under strict safeguards to protect the public, subject to scrutiny of draft clauses. My government will seek the approval of Parliament relating to the agreed financial stability mechanism within the euro area. My government will seek the approval of Parliament on the anticipated accession of Croatia to the European Union. My government will work to support a secure and stable Afghanistan, to reduce the threat of nuclear proliferation, including in Iran, and to bring greater stability to the Horn of Africa. In the Middle East and North Africa, my government will support the extension of political and economic freedom in countries in transition. My government has set out firm plans to spend 0.7% of gross national income as official development assistance from 2013. This will be the first time the United Kingdom has met this agreed international commitment. My government will build strategic partnerships with the emerging powers. The United Kingdom will assume the presidency of the G8 in 2013. My government will use this opportunity to promote international security and prosperity. In the year of the Diamond Jubilee, Prince Philip and I will continue to take part in celebrations across the United Kingdom. The Prince of Wales and other members of my family are travelling widely to take part in festivities throughout the Commonwealth. Prince Philip and I look forward to the London Olympic and Paralympic Games and to welcoming visitors from around the world to London and venues throughout the country. Other measures will be laid before you. My Lords and members of the House of Commons, I pray that the blessing of Almighty God may rest upon your councils.
Chancellor approaches again now that the speech has been delivered. The Queen returns the speech, puts safely back in the purse, and Kenneth Clarke takes his position again near the Earl Marshal. pages of honour move into position. Everyone stands in the House of Lords for the Queen's departure. The Queen and the Duke will make their way round to the left. Acknowledge the members of the House of Lords, the Lords spiritual and temporal, and return through the Prince's Chamber and again in procession through the Royal Gallery and back into the robing room, ready for the departure. And led into the Royal Gallery once again by the heralds and by the two maces, the mace bearers, Lord Speaker, Baroness de Souza, and the Lord Privy Seal, Sir George Young, just there on the left. It's an ancient office, as indeed is the office of the Marquis of Cholmondeley, which is the Lord Great Chamberlain, one of the great officers of state, performing an important role, not just at the Palace of Westminster, where he is in charge of the royal parts of the palace, the Royal Gallery being probably the biggest part, but the robing room as well, and the Sovereign's entrance, but sharing responsibility too for some of the other parts of the Royal Palace, including the Westminster Hall. Lord Stirrup with the Sword of State, and the Yeomen of the Guard still providing their guard of honour. And as they pass through the great archway that is surrounded by portraits of the Queen and the Duke, and indeed the Queen's father, George VI, and Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother.